Go.
Hey everybody.
Hello.
How are you doing today? I mean, I guess you could comment your answers as to how you're doing. It is Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. because that is when we scheduled for this to happen, and it is happening. So,
Although, so we don't forget, that's not when it's happening next week.
Next week we are planning to do it on Monday at 3 p.m., which is back to when it originally was, but only for that week because of Thanksgiving. Cool, my computer's muted. I needed to make sure that was happening. But anyway, so only next week it's happening because of Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving is Thursday, and we'd like to be spending that with our limited amount of family that we can spend Thanksgiving with on Thursday. So we won't be here Thursday.
We will not be here on Thursday.
But tune in on Monday where the roles are reversed.
Yes. Do I get to sit behind the desk?
I guess so.
Nice.
This is the host seat and chair and desk. Just like I feel like Jimmy Fallon oftentimes when I'm doing this, and I love Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah.
You know, so.
You're more Jimmy Fallon than Stephen Colbert?
Oh, definitely.
Or James Corden?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know if it makes it weird to mention that, you know, I have man crushes.
It's only as weird as you make it.
I mean, on Justin Timberlake, Jimmy Fallon, and Matt Damon.
That's weird.
Why is that weird?
Oh, wait, sorry, Justin Timberlake?
Yeah.
Sorry, for some reason I heard Justin Bieber.
No, not Justin Bieber, Justin Timberlake.
Fair enough.
And mainly because of his relationship with Jimmy Fallon and their history
Yes,
of rap
they
videos.
do some good skits together.
That was a complete sidetrack.
Yeah, that's not what
I have
we're here
another
to talk
sidetrack to mention to you. There are holidays today, just so you know, and today is World Toilet Day. And the reason why is because the UN, the United Nations, made this day to celebrate clean toilets and just, you know, the technology that toilets are, but also to raise awareness of the 4.2 billion people who go without safely managed sanitation. So.
Yeah, toilets are like at the top of the list of really, really important things that we take for granted.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Like, have you ever had like the water gets shut off and you can't use the toilet and it just totally disrupts you? It like hangs over you like I have like 2 flushes because there's 2 toilets and that's all I can use.
Yep. So that is what today is all about, is the people that do not have that. And so if you're interested and want more information, you can go to worldtoiletday.info. And you can just learn more about it and see how you might get involved if you're interested in that. But anyway, it's also National Play Monopoly Day. So play some Monopoly today.
I do not like Monopoly.
Or drink carbonated beverages with caffeine in them, because it's National Drink Carbonated Beverages with caffeine in them. All right, we're going to move on from the holidays and talk about Jesus, because Jesus should be celebrated year-round. It is always a Jesus holiday, in my opinion. So that's just my opinion, though. Is there a theological backup for that?
What?
Theological, like, can you theologically back that up, that every day is a Jesus holiday?
Yeah. Well, even from the sermon, talking about how every day is, like, we're living in the Sabbath year now. We're living in the Jubilee. That means every day is a Sabbath. Yeah. It means you don't have to work.
Bada boom, bada bang. Yep, I'm leaving.
Go out into the fields and glean.
Yes.
See who can get out of the church field over here.
Yeah. So, all right, well, how this works, this is deleted scenes. We also didn't introduce ourselves. I'm Jack, Pastor Jack.
Pastor Matt.
Yeah. This has been a just crazy introduction period. But this is deleted scenes. This is where we talk about things that didn't quite make the sermon on Sunday, or I ask questions to Pastor Matt about the sermon so we can learn more about it, or you can comment with questions in the comment section, and Pastor Matt will answer those questions as well. So make sure you feel free to do that, to comment your questions. So without further ado, we're going to get started with some questions. So first, I just want to read the misconception from your sermon, and that was that keeping the Sabbath is about taking one day off a week to rest and or go to church. So I wanted to ask, even though this is the misconception, you mentioned that this is healthy. Why is this healthy, and do you recommend that people practice this possibly?
Yeah, so the misconception is that that's all Sabbath is about, but that is definitely a part of it. And I do think that the practice of Sabbath is very healthy because it teaches us, it gives us a chance to take a break, because the rat race is not the way we're meant to live. It's not God's ultimate plan for us. There is work. The Adam and Eve were made to do work, but they weren't made to toil, to that sense of never being done, of always being stressed, of being, one paycheck away, or one, just from not having enough. Like that rat race is not part of God's plan. And when we get caught up in that, we also start to think that the world turns because of the work we do. And if we were to stop, everything would fall apart. And so Sabbath is a very good, healthy way to connect with the reality of the fact that God is the one in control, and the world won't actually fall apart if we take time to make him a priority. Because very often the reason why we don't make God a priority, or we don't make God's plans or his commands a priority, is because we don't trust that things will work out if we follow him, or if we trust in him. We don't, and we need to learn by practice that God is actually in control, and we're not the one that make things happen. So I think it's really healthy in terms of our understanding of our place before God. And if it's true that God is in control, then we can afford to take a day off without fear. And taking a day off is just healthy. It's just good. It's good for your body. It's good for your soul. It's just good. But it's made possible by God's control of everything.
Yeah. So when you talk about the Sabbath cycles, you talk about 4 different cycles, and pretty consistently in those you talk about the community, or all people and everybody in that community. And would you say that this emphasis is on bringing God's people together with each other, or together with God, or both, or is this kind of separate from the idea of coming together?
It's definitely, you can't observe Sabbath alone. Sabbath days are meant to be observed. I guess you could if you're in a household of one, and you don't see anyone on the Sabbath day, then you could. But otherwise, whoever's in your sphere is meant to be affected by Sabbath, and you are actually meant to get together on the festivals. The idea of getting together with your community on Sabbath is a later development, but at least on the festivals, everybody gets together. And so there is an emphasis on getting together, and there's an emphasis on, but the rest is in our relationship with God. Like I was talking about, you can only rest because you're connecting with God, which is why, and it's holy. You're supposed to use it for God's purposes, which means you also can't spend Sabbath apart from God. But I think the reason why you have to gather together to do Sabbath, or it has to touch all of your relationships, is because human beings are interconnected. And the only way I can have rest for myself without the people around me resting is if I make them pick up the slack. So if I'm going to have a Sabbath and my wife's not going to have a Sabbath, she has to do all the things that I would have done, and she has to pick that up. And then I'm actually having my Sabbath at other people's expense. So I think it's essential that you have Sabbath together. But ultimately it is about being in the presence of God. So those are both essential. If you're not resting with God, then it's not a holy day. And if you're not resting with others, then it's not really the rest that God has in mind.
So along with the idea, or just talking about, how there's different cycles, so the Sabbath day, the calendar of festivals, and the Sabbath year, and the Jubilee year, all these things were a part of the Sabbath. What did the Israelites actually do well at practicing? What did they observe well?
It's hard to say what they did well, because what usually gets called out by the prophets is what they're doing wrong. But there is a sense that they did the ceremony of the tabernacle and the temple pretty well. Even when they were at their worst, they were doing the sacrifices. The problem is that God will then say through the prophets, I hate your sacrifices because it's the only thing you're doing right, and your heart's not in it because you're disobeying me in every other way. So you do these sacrifices, but you have blood on your hands, not of the animals, but of the people that you've subjugated and hurt and killed and all that. So it seems like they did the sacrifices pretty well. The really precise Sabbath keeping is actually something that we only really know about after the exile, after they come back from exile. Like when Jesus interacts with the Pharisees who have all these rules, that seems to be after the exile. So we're not really sure how well they did the Sabbath during the majority of the Old Testament. But they were terrible at the bigger cycles. And they did seem to do the holidays, the festivals, as well as we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
But just nothing on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
Or
So-
year level.
Yeah, I want to come to a couple questions that you want to talk about
Yes.
specifically.
Uh-huh.
And the first one is, why was the exile 70 years? Because you mentioned that 7 was a very important number with all of the Sabbath
Yes.
and keeping. So why
Yep.
70 years?
So this is something, if you're watching Deleted Scenes, we talked about this before, but I don't assume people have watched all of them, and it's irrelevant again to this one. So they're supposed to observe a Sabbath year every 7, and one of the reasons why we know that they don't observe any of them, first of all, it never mentions them observing them, and second of all, when you read the book of Chronicles, you get through the chronologies, and it's the stuff that's really like mind-bogglingly boring. One of the things you get out of that is that they were in the Promised Land for 490 years before they went into exile.
Mm-hmm.
So 490 years divided by 7 is 70.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they missed 70 Sabbath years. And in Leviticus, right in the passage that we were reading, if I had kept reading, at one point it would have said that God said, if you don't keep these laws, then I'm going to send you into exile, and I'm going to give the land the rest that you were supposed to give it, which is the Sabbath year. The Sabbath year is a rest for land. So he says, if you don't do this, I'm going to kick you out, and I'm going to do it. So they're in there for 490 years. They miss 70 Sabbath years. So when God sends them into exile, they're gone for 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the land is kind of abandoned. And so that's God's way of enforcing those Sabbath years. So they ended up getting them, but only because God forced it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that blew my mind when I first heard that.
Yeah, I mean, math. It's when math is actually fun,
Yeah.
just figuring out how those things connect and why God does certain things. So.
And the mathematical things are usually the ones other people have to point out to me because I don't track with them as well.
Yeah.
So somebody says like, "Oh yeah, I didn't notice that."
Well, it's also the mathematical parts are often parts of the Bible that nobody reads.
Yeah.
There's a lot of math involved with genealogies, and
Yes.
especially the genealogies of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody ever reads those. I certainly don't read those for fun,
Yeah.
And so, in fact, I think you had a sermon where you talked about just how people scan over that, and so-and-so begot so-and-so, and so-and-so begot so-and-so. I think it might have been at the start of this sermon series.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that as
So-
one of the flyover parts of the Bible.
So, anyway, so the next question that you wanted to address is what day actually is the Sabbath?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw my 2 cents out there because I think there's actually a pretty simple answer to this. So the debate is, there are certain traditions that say the Sabbath is Saturday because the Sabbath are certain Christian traditions because the Sabbath for the Jews is Saturday, has always been Saturday. That's the 7th day. Well, Christians started gathering for church on Sundays because Jesus rose from the dead on the first day, on the Sunday. And so as far back as we can tell from the very beginning, when Christians gathered together as the church, they gathered together on Sundays. And so the debate is Sabbath Sunday or Sabbath Saturday? And for like in America, when they had Sabbath laws, they were about Sunday. You couldn't work on Sundays. Your business is going to be open on Sundays. But then some Christian traditions have said, no, you can't change that because the Bible doesn't say that it's changed. So it must be on Saturday. So that's where you get Seventh-day Adventists, Seventh-day Baptists. That says 7th day in the name. That's why. And so which day is it on? Well, it's true that the Bible never says that the Sabbath changed from the 7th day to the first day. That is true. But it also never says that the Sabbath is the day that you're supposed to go to church on. As far as we can tell, for the first 200 to 300 years of church history, Sunday was the day that Christians gathered together in churches, and Saturday was the day that Jews gathered together in synagogue, and Jewish Christians probably did both. So synagogue continued to be on Saturday because that's when Jews worshiped, and then Sunday was when they went to church, which was a whole separate day, and they never thought of it as the Sabbath. They never talked about it as the Sabbath. It was the first day, which is the day you went to church. And then as church history went on and it became much more Gentile and the Jewish roots kind of disappeared, like people weren't as aware of them anymore, then they had nobody observing Sabbath on Saturday. So they said, the day we go to church must be the Sabbath. So personally, I would say the Sabbath is Saturday. It always has been Saturday, but Christians don't go to church on the Sabbath. We traditionally go to church. Our big celebration is on Sunday because that's the day of the resurrection, the day after the Sabbath.
Well, that's what brings me to a thing that I've always thought about. If Sunday is the Sabbath day, for ministers, I mean, that's technically a day where they're working. They put effort into preaching and ministering to people, and there's some times when that's not very restful and that's very strenuous. Yep. And so I've always wondered, do ministers just not get a Sabbath day, not get a day to rest, or how does that work?
Well, okay, so there's a difference between Sabbath and a day off. Mm-hmm. And because if Sabbath is a communal worship event, some people have to take leadership or have to do some of the work to make it happen. The priests did not actually fully rest on the Sabbath. They were able to do the work of the tabernacle on the Sabbath, and it didn't count as work. So no, pastors would not get the Sabbath off if you're counting Sunday as the Sabbath. That doesn't mean they don't get a day off. But again, the point of Sabbath is not to get a day off from work. It's to have a day dedicated to God. Yeah. And if you're doing that together, you're going to have people who organize it. So that's why I and we practice other days off, because Sabbath is still a Sabbath and a work day for us.
So I want to bring up your last point at the end, because I think that's a good ending point. Okay. But do you think the true motivation behind Sabbath, which is essentially kind of connecting with God and connecting other people with God and bringing rest to others, right? Do you think that true motivation behind that is lost when the Jewish leaders, especially in the New Testament, they add all the this is what work is and this is what work is not and this is what rest is? Do you think they kind of lose that motivation when they do that?
Yeah, I think the focus, and this is the problem with legalism in general, is that you get focused on what you're not supposed to do as opposed to what you are supposed to do. And the focus becomes on not crossing lines as opposed to doing what's inside the lines. So when you get so overly focused on what the exact definition of work, then you forget about the definition of rest. And so, because in a way, you could say healing is work, although it doesn't seem to be work the way Jesus does it, but it's work. But it's also rest in the sense of doing the work of God. If rest means living in God's good creation, there's nothing more restful in that sense than healing and freeing and forgiving. That's all, that's the epitome of Sabbath. And so if you focus on what all needs to be excluded, then you take the focus off what actually needs to be done. And it's possible to not cross the lines of Sabbath into work and still miss the point. You could take a nap all day and you will not have worked, but you will not have used the Sabbath the way God wants you to.
So one of these points that you made is that Jesus defined his ministry as the ultimate jubilee, the coming of freedom and forgiveness for all. And so I wanted to ask, what do we have to look forward to because of this proclamation?
What do we have to look forward to because we're living in the Jubilee? I think the biggest thing is forgiveness that is readily accessible. One of the misconceptions we've pushed back against is the idea that the Old Testament sacrificial system was supposed to do what Jesus did on the cross, and it just didn't work. They did totally different things. So before Jesus, there wasn't just this idea of having ready access to forgiveness. God's forgiveness was as being forgiven by God is just like being forgiven by somebody else. You didn't have proof they were going to do it. And so, you might do something horrible and be terrified whether the person you've hurt is going to forgive you or not. And there was that same sense with God, that because you see in the Old Testament, they have to work out the relationship to be forgiven. And that there's always fear involved in that. And so when Jesus declares the day of the Lord's favor, the year of the Lord's favor, what he's saying is that mystery is cleared up. There is always access to forgiveness. God wants to forgive people, and he's going to. It's like when God, like if God were to forgive all monetary debts. And that forgiveness, and just like when you think about what would the consequences of the Sabbath year be if you were to forgive all debts, and you start to think through how it would affect things, the same thing happens when you look at forgiveness. How does that, because it should radically change my life to have ready access to forgiveness. It should change the way I carry other people's burdens, the way I blame other people. It should totally transform the way I behave. And so what I think we can look forward to is being forgiven and released ourselves, and then that empowering us to forgive and release other people. And to be generous, again, because if God is generous enough to forgive all of us, then we can trust that we can forgive others, whether it's forgiving something that they've done to us or forgiving something they owe us, and trust that God is going to be in control, and we're not going to go destitute because we've forgiven everybody.
Yeah. So I want to remind you guys can comment questions in the comment section and ask Pastor Matt some questions if you'd like to. Also, make sure you play Monopoly today because it's National Monopoly Day. Anyway, I like Monopoly. I don't understand why people don't like Monopoly.
It's too long. Monopoly is right below Risk for me.
It's so strategic.
Well, and I was also the youngest of 3 brothers, so
you got taken advantage of all the time.
I did. Yeah.
I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, so I know.
Yep.
I know those little secrets.
Yeah.
Now my sisters are in high school and college, so I can't really take advantage of them anymore.
It was like within the last 2 months, that my oldest brother finally confessed to me that he used to cheat as the banker all the time.
Yeah, I used to cheat all the time. Yeah. That's an oldest sibling thing. That's what
capitalism.
Happens. Yeah. Woo! We're living in a giant monopoly. Some might say that about Disney. Anyway, moving on from that. So the last point that you made on your sermon outline is this: Christians practice Sabbath by bringing forgiveness, reconciliation, and fellowship with God to the world around us. And I know you gave a couple of examples in your sermon of what this looks like. Maybe there's a checker that's had a rough day and just being patient with them and whatever that might look like. But can you just expound on this and how we might do this in day-to-day life?
Yeah. So I don't know if I gave an example in the second service that I didn't give in the first, which is how Casey my wife is 8.5 months, 8 3/4 months pregnant. She's very pregnant. We had to go in and get the baby turned, and it was like a 90-second procedure, but it ended up, because of delays and things, taking 10 hours. And we had a babysitter. It actually was like the third, like our first arrangement didn't work, so we were on like option 4, and they took James and they ended up with him for 10 hours, and they were great, and they just kept giving us kind of permission to not be freaked out and not be in a rush, and it was such a relief. And they could have reacted differently. They could have been really, they could have been really protective of their time and said, "Nope, we said we do this for a few hours, so you need someone to come pick them up," or something, But for us, I think it means being willing to be inconvenienced or to make sacrifices in order to bring relief and freedom to other people. Because that's what we're in the business of doing. You can't forgive debts. Like there's still an economy at play. You can't forgive debts without taking a loss, right? If I forgive you owe me $1 million and I forgive your debt, I'm not getting any of that money back. I've lost money. The people who helped us out lost time to themselves. Whenever we care for other people and we bring freedom or relief or release to other people, it costs us something. And so as Christians, because we have received the kind of forgiveness that we have, and we have received freedom that cost Jesus his life, we need to make actual investments in freedom, in releasing people and relieving people, because that's ultimately, I think, the biggest obstacle. Is that people, it would be great to forgive all the debts if it wasn't going to cost people money, and we end up running against the practicality of those kinds of things, and it's only going to work if there are people in the world who are willing to invest in that. There are actually groups of Christians. There's a ministry it's like Jubilee Ministries or something like that, and what their goal is to buy up the debt of third world countries and forgive it, because their small economies can be crippled by debt, and the debt isn't even that big, but their economy isn't that big either. And so their goal is to forgive debts so that people can be free, and that costs a lot of money.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that this sermon has kind of fallen in the lead up to the holiday season, because I think we see this more consistently and maybe just more publicized during the holiday season, and how people offer just relief to people that are in struggles in terms of food or shelter or whatever it might be. So I think that's really well timed message. And I don't know if you intended that or if that's just kind of what happened, or
that's how it worked out.
That's how it worked out.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really cool. But I wanted to ask also, don't forget you guys can comment too. But people think different things are restful, and they just are restful to different people. For some people, I think more on the general scale. For introverts, they find rest and rejuvenation away from others, and then there's the extroverts that find that rest and rejuvenation with others. Now, I want to ask. I kind of want to reword this question that we talked about before. So, in terms of the Sabbath, the point is to be kind of investing in God and your relationship with Him. And so, for people, it's not necessarily this idea of like, oh, whatever brings me more energy. That's not necessarily Sabbath. Sabbath is, how can I find rest in God and do what His will is for my life? Is that a correct interpretation of that?
Yeah. Taking a day of rest is not, if it's a Sabbath, is not about just doing whatever you feel like. It's about, because it's holy, it's set aside for God's purposes. And the word that is defined, that is used for rest, I mean, it's actually for, the Hebrew word is to stop. Because it's not about relaxing, it's about stopping the work that you're doing, which for some people would be not restful. I know for me, there are days off where it's a struggle for me to not focus on work and not be thinking about work and that kind of thing. Especially like if you're a farmer and it's harvest and you got to get the harvest in and you got to take 1 out of every 7 days off when the guys in the nation next door just work every day and they get it in sooner. Like that there can be a lot of pressure. That can actually be a lot of anxiety. It's probably not very emotionally restful, but it's obedient and it's learning and it's using the day for God's intended purpose. So keeping Sabbath doesn't necessarily mean that you feel more rested at the end of the day. It means that you have spent the day living according to God's design. And because we live in a broken world, there are some stressor points there. It's hard to live in God's design in a world that is broken. So yeah, I think you're right to say it's not just about what makes me comfortable. It's about how God wants us to spend our time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of days when I'm really comfortable just laying on the couch and watching Netflix. I don't think that's necessarily, a Sabbath. That's not focusing on God and His and connecting with Him. So
now that is not to say that some of the Sabbath practices I know are very common among Jews and Sabbatarians, people who really practice the rules, are things like family dinners are an integral part of Sabbath observance. Going on walks is very, very common in Jewish communities, like a Sabbath walk, and those kinds of things. I don't want to. Those are ways of enjoying God's creation and enjoying the family God has given us, and I think God wants us to enjoy the world. That's why He made it good. So it's not to say that Sabbath should not be emotionally restful to us as well, but that's not ultimately the definition of rest. So I think there are a lot of really good ways we can spend it together, and we can work on our relationships with each other at the same time that we work on our relationship with God. But we do that because it's important to God, not because it's just what I feel like doing that day.
Well, the last question I have for you, and this might give everybody at home a couple minutes to comment on any questions you might have, is how do you find rest? How do you practice Sabbath personally?
I have never, to be honest, it's funny preaching on this. I've never actually really tried a firm Sabbath discipline. And for me, I find rest one of two ways. For me, rest is really about mental rest. And it either means spending time really focusing on just something that I'm interested in at the time. because I get really focused on things, but they're not always the things that I need to be focused on. So like at work,
Yeah.
if my brain is on something else, I have to do the work of staying focused on my work that's ahead of me. And on days off, I can just let my brain go. Sometimes I can just let my brain go on those things.
Yeah.
And other times it's just good to get some kind of distraction from whatever my brain's doing. And just do something completely different that gets me distracted. And James is really good for that, my son James. One of the interesting things that I'm discovering, though, is for me, housework is starting to become an important form of rest, because there are things that I don't have enough time to do on a weekday, and it weighs down on me mentally. Like, this thing needs to get done. I notice it on Monday, but on Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't have time. Finally, I get to a day off where I can just knock a whole bunch of things out, and then I can rest. And I that makes me think of the creation story, how maybe there's this, because I said God doesn't rest because he's winded, but I could imagine there being a sense of he rests because, oh, it's finally been done. You know, I've wanted that to happen. And that was important, and now it's finally done, and it's out there.
Yeah.
I get that. All right, so we have a question. Scripture seems to suggest that all Israelites failed to keep the Sabbath year, etc. Do you think that they totally ignored the Sabbaths from the very beginning of God's command? And do you think it was the case for all the Israelites? Or were some possibly faithful in the beginning and continue to observe and encourage Sabbath observation through their children and their children's children? You know, it's interesting that the Bible actually tells us so little about about how the Israelites actually observed the law before they went into exile. I mean, we get the prophets telling us that they failed, but like in the narrative, we don't get stories about observing the Sabbath and celebrating the Sabbath and things like that. We definitely get a sense that it's important, because the prophets don't have to reteach the law. People know what they're talking about when they call them to task for it. There was a kind of almost like a monastic group in Israel, the sons of the prophets. And they were a group of people who lived out in the wilderness, and they were prophets, and they seemed to have different locations and things like that, and they were probably maintaining the traditions, but we really don't know much. So I would assume that there were some who were keeping it, and it's actually surprising when you find out some of the big figures in the Bible who didn't keep things. I don't know about keeping the weekly Sabbath. I know that it says Josiah, one of the last, like the father of one of the last kings, or the father of the last king of Israel, or of Judah. Sorry, let me say that again. The father of the last king of Judah, when he was king, he observed Passover, and it says that was the first time they had done it that way since the Judges, which means that David didn't even keep Passover, or he didn't make the nation at least keep Passover. So yeah, I think we should assume that there were some faithful people who carried it on. We don't know who they were. But the fact that everybody always seems to know what the rules were, even when they're breaking them. Nobody's surprised actually, there's one point when Josiah, they find a copy of the law in the temple, and they read it and they go, "Oh wow, we didn't know all this was in there. We've been doing a terrible job." But we don't know how much of that was a surprise to them.
Yeah.
But okay, sorry. And now I'm just thinking of this as I'm talking. Last thing though, the one way we know that they kept it up is that there was never a question of which day is the Sabbath. I mean, they never lost track of the cycle of sevens. So we know that the day that this Saturday is the seventh day, some number of weeks since the creation. So we know that cycle held true. Because, for instance, the reason why Jews don't have a year of Jubilee, they don't observe one, is because they don't know which year is the 50th year. They lost the tradition. The calculations have been lost, and so they don't know which Sabbath year we're on. But the Sabbath day continued. So yes, they must have followed it. Sorry for the rambling answer, but I had a lot of things in my head had to jumble around before they came out of my mouth.
Yeah. That's just how it happens sometimes when you're answering questions or
Yeah.
talking about things. Or
Start talking before you know what your answer is.
Yeah. That's kind of the pressure of live streaming.
Yeah.
You know, it's like someone asks a question and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I actually have to answer this like right now.
Yeah.
Because we're on a time, I mean, not that we have like a specific time constraint.
But nobody
you
wants
know.
to just watch me sit here silently thinking for like 5 minutes
Yeah,
before
then,
I
like,
give my answer.
I got the answer. Here we go, guys. Like, let's go. So the
You're
final
welcome, Bill.
thing that we have to discuss, so if you have any more questions, now is the time to comment them, is what is the significance of the year 2021?
Yes, this actually fits right off of what I was just saying. We've lost track of the Jubilee year, but we have not lost track of the Sabbath year. And the next Sabbath year begins in 2021. So we are headed into a Sabbath year, which I think is incredible. And I'm toying around with a bunch of ideas in my head of how we can use that as a church. And I think it would be really cool to come off of 2020 being what it's been into a year of rest, a year of forgiveness and release. So technically the way modern Judaism observes it, they observe the 7th month as the beginning of the year, which is weird. Mm-hmm. So Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is in like September, October each year. So that's when Jews will begin celebrating the day of, or the year of the Sabbath year. But as far as I can tell from the way they observed it in the time of the Bible, it would start around 2 weeks before Passover. So yeah, 2021 is a Sabbath year. So if you're a farmer, you got to take the year off.
Give the land a rest.
Please don't take the year off. We need that food.
You know, when Moses is like, let my people go. Let my land rest. Let God's land rest.
That's actually
let his people go.
One of these days I want to do a study on the importance of the land as something that God cares about.
Well, it's very obviously a gift to the Israelites.
Yeah, but it's also something that they have a responsibility for. Mm-hmm. Like God loans it to them and says, hey, take good care of this. Give it a rest every once in a while. Yeah. And he talks about like a lot of the reason why why they receive judgment is because of what they've done to the land. And he talks about how if the land will spit them out. Mm-hmm. There's just a really fascinating theme through the Old Testament that I want to track down when I have time someday, about how the land is a character in the Bible, and God cares very much about protecting it.
Yeah. I think it's very clear, like with any resource that God's people have. It's very clearly like God has given that to you, and you're supposed to use that resource to benefit the kingdom.
Yeah.
I think for us that goes a long way with finances, and mm-hmm. how God gives that to us, and how we should then be, just having an open hand, so God can put however much in there, and then use that for His kingdom.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on the whole thing. So,
cool.
We've enjoyed having you. We really appreciate it. And final reminder: play Monopoly tonight. So grab family and play some Monopoly. So watch your kids if they're playing, and make sure that the oldest sibling is not cheating. It is not cheating their siblings out of money from the bank.
So. Yeah, keep an eye on James.
Yeah, exactly, right? He might be cheating Charlotte out of her money from the bank. So anyway, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you. And tune in next Monday. At 3.
Monday.
Yeah, Monday. Yep, exactly. Monday at 3 p.m. and we'll be doing it with the roles reversed. So Pastor Matt will be in this seat, and I'll be in that seat. And
unless Charlotte has been born, in which case it'll just be you in some seat talking to the screen.
Yeah. Who knows what seat I'll be in? I'll do like a live stream of me driving somewhere or something like that, and you're just talking together. I don't know.
Those always make me uncomfortable. Like, why are you talking to your phone while you're driving?
Not phone. You can mount a camera and then talk to it.
Well, I know, but still, like that seems like there's so many videos of that. Like, that does not seem safe.
I don't know. To me, it seems normal because I love cars, so I watch a lot of car YouTube videos where people are doing that. So
yeah.
I don't know. In fact, I've done that with a friend before. We used to have a YouTube channel together, and we did like 7 videos together, and we called it "What Happens in the Car Doesn't Stay in the Car," because now it's with you guys because we talk about stuff and share it with you.
Yeah. Oh, Bill made one more comment. He said, on our farm as a youth, we follow the 7 years with rotating dormancy of acreages. Yes. So that's actually just one last thing as we're wrapping up.
Yes.
There is actually a debate among Jewish scholars, and I presume Christian scholars too, about how exactly the seventh day is observed, because there is the seventh year, the Sabbath year is observed, because in some places it seems like it's observed, like when you buy a field, the clock starts, and the seventh year you own it, you have to give it a break. In which case, you're really just talking about crop rotation and letting your land lie fallow, which is what Bill is talking about. It's actually a very good farming practice. On the other hand, and lots of people do that. Lots of farmers have done that throughout the years, just to give that patch of ground a break. But what Leviticus seems to be talking about is having every field do that at the same time. Nobody's ever done that before. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's my wife went to Israel before we got married, and a tour guide mentioned that the Promised Land, Israel is really, really fertile, and a lot of people attribute that to the fact that they had this practice of letting the ground lie fallow, which they did actually do on an individual basis in individual fields. They just never did it all at once. So it is actually, just like Sabbath rest is a good, healthy practice for your body and your mind and your heart, Sabbath years are a good practice for the land. So it seems like when God's design has wisdom built right into it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we really enjoyed having you here with us, and so I'm going to have Pastor Matt sign off for us, if you would.
All righty. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord. See you later.